check out our website, 973ESPN.com. Check out all of the Eagles coverage from Scott Grayson and our next guest, John McMullen, who were in Minneapolis all week long, getting you ready for the game. And now the post-reaction, John McMullen's with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. So, John, not quite the way we thought it would go down. Some people thought they'd win. Some people thought they'd lose. But I don't know that we thought that the score would be 41-33 in a basically offensive firework explosion, if you will, last night.
No, I couldn't have pictured in 1,000 years the Eagles winning a shootout. I mean, that would have been, on paper at least, a disaster-type scenario for them. And we talked about it all week. I mean, the Giants kind of showed the way to beat the Patriots. It was with a strong front four getting consistent pressure that really wasn't there. The Patriots had 600 yards of total offense until Brandon Graham finally got through late. By the end of the third quarter, this game had already set the Super Bowl record for total offense from both teams. So it was just up and down like a high-scoring basketball game, and it's really incredible that Nick Foles was able to match Tom Brady bullet for bullet, the greatest of all time, playing, by the way, like the greatest of all time. And Nick Foles was right there with him.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how the fairy tale started in 2013. Last night was the period at the end of that book or that chapter or whatever, because who knows what's next for Nick Foles. But it was almost like he played with, this look in his eye that if this is the last time you hear from me, I'm giving you all I got. And I felt that in 2013, he didn't feel like the leader of that team, but he felt like he was the leader of the team last night. And I thought that was the difference between the 27-2 Nick Foles and the guy last night.
Well, I got to tell you, the guy last night, and really it goes back to the Vikings game in the NFC Championship. And I argued, I talked all year on the show about just how good Carson Wentz was before he went down with his torn ACL, and I believe he would have been the MVP of this league, and if he didn't get hurt. And while I say that, and this is, I just told Scott Grayson this off the air. I said, I can't envision a healthy Carson Wentz playing any better than Nick Foles did against the Vikings and the Patriots. It's almost impossible. That's the kind of level he played at in obviously a short 2-week period that doesn't translate to 10 years. I'm not trying to say that Carson Wentz isn't the franchise quarterback of this team. He certainly is. But for those 2 weeks, Nick Foles was as good as it gets playing quarterback in this league. Right. And I don't know if anybody can.
Well, and the difference really, and I talked a little bit about this earlier because there was a guy who called in and said they should trade Wentz, and
no.
The difference to me is this, John. Yeah, Foles maybe played 2 games that maybe would be better than what Wentz would have gave you. But it is a 16-game season, and you don't know over 16 weeks how consistent Foles would be to even get you to this point.
No, and that's the point why Carson was so important and was still such a big part of this title. A lot of this run had to do with the fact that they got the number 1 seed. As I mentioned, Carson Wentz did all the heavy lifting to get this team in that position. If they have to go on the road and face Matt Ryan, if they have to go on the road and face maybe Drew Brees, even if they had to go on the road to Minneapolis and face that Vikings team, they probably don't win those games. So the fact that he put this team in the position to where the road to Super Bowl 52 went through Philadelphia, and all they had to do was win 2 home playoff games. That meant so much to it. So he's a big part of this as well. And you're right. If Carson goes down in week 2, there's no way the Eagles are in that position. There's no way they're hosting 2 home playoff games. And everybody realizes that in the Philadelphia organization. And that's why you mentioned 16 games versus 2 games. It's also about 10 years. Carson is the franchise quarterback of this team. But there's now incredible pressure on him because Nick Foles got this city what it's wanted for so long. And obviously there's a lot of other people involved. Doug Peterson, Frank Reich gave me a great quote after the game. He said, Doug is a star. He doesn't want to be, but he's a star. And he is. His play calling is just, it's the best in football. As a second-year coach, we talked about Brandon Graham, the way he clinched the game with the strip sack, the 4th and 1 conversions, the way Alshon Jeffrey played after guaranteeing victory, and Nelson Aguilar. You can run through a host of players, and everyone contributed. And how many times, Mike, have we said, look up and down this roster and look at how many guys had career years all at the same time.
Which is why, John, they have to be able to make the tough decisions in the offseason because you don't want to be the '08 Phillies where you hold on to these guys because they gave you the championship, and then that's what ends up holding you back.
Yeah, and that's the difficult job that Howie Roseman has, and that's everybody goes through it. I mean, this group will always be revered in Philadelphia because they got him the first Super Bowl championship. But you can't think that way as a GM or a guy who runs the football side of the equation like Howie does. He's got to make difficult decisions. There's turnover every year in the NFL. There's going to be a lot of players that aren't back from this team. That's just the way this league works. And you have to, make an assessment. Nick Foles' value is never going to be higher than right now. In a quarterback-deficient league, you can probably spin him off for some significant draft capital. And as you look forward to April, this is a team that doesn't have a second and a third-round pick. So it's going to be one of those difficult decisions for Howie Roseman.
No doubt. Last night there's a couple of plays, John. I think the strip sack by Brandon Graham might be the most important play in the history of the franchise. I mean, that was absolutely needed because there was too much time on the clock. We all know where that game was going.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly described it as we had seen this movie before. You kind of knew what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, Brandon breaks through and makes the play. And let's be honest, the defense did not play well in that game. But that has always defined Brandon Graham as a player. I mean, that's what he is. He's a high-motor, high-energy guy who never stops. So you can block him for 3 quarters, 3.5 quarters. Eventually, he's going to make a play, get to the quarterback, and what happened. Personally, I think the context of the game, I thought the 2 4th and 1 conversions were huge. The one at the end of the first half, obviously, is a touchdown. And even the 4th and 1 conversion to Zach Ertz.
I brought it up earlier, John. That play there is not getting enough attention.
Yeah. I asked Frank Reich about that specific play, and I said, worded it as, if you don't get that, you're giving Tom Brady a short field. And Frank cut me off, and he said, game's over. Game's over.
Wow.
If we don't convert that 4th and 1. That's how the Eagles felt at that particular time. Now, even if they went down and scored mathematically, they would have had a chance, and it would have been a one-possession game. But that's how they felt on the sideline. If they didn't get that play, game was over. So from that standpoint, the context of it, I think that was the biggest play of the game. And then the 4th and 1 at the goal line. Look, 31 other coaches would have kicked the field goal in that situation and went into halftime and enjoyed Justin Timberlake. And Doug Peterson put so much pressure on opposing defenses, and he's done it all year. And I don't think that gets enough play. And I think in a copycat league, we always talk about the NFL as a copycat league, and it is, but it's a slow-moving one. You're going to see teams around this league start thinking seriously about not giving up possession so easily because of what Doug Peterson has been doing.
Talk about Doug Peterson and the 4th down play on the goal line where they throw the ball to to Nick Foles. They give it to the shotgun. It's a direct snap to Clement, who hands it off to Burton, who was a college quarterback, and he finds Foles in the end zone. Where did that play come from? How long have they been working on it? Because when they called timeout, Foles goes over to Peterson, and Peterson pointed right out of play, and they both looked at each other like, that's the one. Let's do it. So what's the origin of that play?
Yeah, I brought that up with Frank as well. And Frank said, they're coming out of the timeout, and Doug said, we're running Philly special. That's the name of the play. And everyone said, okay, we're going to go run it. And they lifted it from the Chicago Bears, who had run it early in the season. It basically, you want to show run really, really heavy.
Did the Bears convert it?
Yes, the Bears converted it.
Okay.
And they did show heavy run, and you can see it. The Patriots saw Wildcat, and they thought Corey Clement was going to get the football. Ultimately, obviously, he did. But he flipped it to Trey Burton, as you mentioned, was recruited by Urban Meyer down at Florida via quarterback before he switched positions. And he throws the ball to Nick Foles, who's a better athlete than people give him credit for, former basketball player. And it's interesting, I think. I think there was also a little, kick in the butt type thing, because the Patriots had the great sort of trick play, but didn't connect. Brady was wide open. But the pass was just a little bit off, and they could have had 7 on that one. But that's, what I kind of brought up as far as, I said 31 out of 32 coaches would have kicked the field goal there. And Frank Reich said, there's no question about it. He said, there's no doubt 31 guys would have kicked the field goal. The only one who would have went for it is Doug Peterson. And that puts an incredible stress on the opposing defense. And I think we've seen it throughout the season, not just in the Super Bowl.
Do you think a lot of these games, we said the defense has won the game for them. They won the game last night. Foles was the MVP. But would you say Doug Peterson got the better of Bill Belichick?
Oh, no question. No question he did. They had no answer for what the Eagles were doing offensively. And I said there was a lot of ways I could envision the Eagles winning this game, because I thought they had more talent. But none of them was them winning a shootout. I just didn't think they had the capability of going sort of bullet for bullet for Tom Brady, especially playing at that level. I mean, I'm talking about typical Brady, who's maybe going to throw for 300 yards and have a big game. He's having a historic game.
500 yards
down the field.
They didn't punt once, John.
No. Think about this. They had 600 yards of total offense. They're the first team in NFL history to not win a football game with 600 yards of total offense. I think the number was 38-0-1 before last night. They never punted the football. They didn't have a turnover until the strip set. It was a very clean game. They had that 600 yards in 25 minutes of having the football. They were going up and down the field, just gashing the Eagles' defense, which has been tremendous left and right. And Nick Foles and Doug Peterson and that offense never wavered. They just kept punching back.
So many plays in that game. The catch by Alshon. I mean, it's a great throw, but Alshon made a couple of plays early in that game to prove the worth that he brings to this team.
Yeah, it's big for him, because earlier in the week he got at least in a little controversy by guaranteeing essentially a victory. And that was a little out of character for Alshon Jeffrey, because he's not your typical diva wide receiver who talks a lot. He's more of an understated guy. But he basically said, "This, we're bringing the trophy home to Philly," guaranteed the win. And he went out there and played at a high level. He had the other great catch on the outside shoulder.
Yeah.
And he nearly got another 50-50 ball that ended up being an interception. He almost had that one as well. So he really came on down the stretch. We talked about him early in the season, not putting up sort of wide receiver one numbers. But he meant so much to that offense, whether he was putting up numbers or not. just by his presence on the field and opening up underneath routes for Zach Ertz and some of the running backs. And by the way, while we talk about that, don't forget Glassborough's own Corey Clement.
He's next on my list.
Yeah, he was amazing.
It was almost like John. It was almost like last night. Peterson was like, "We're here. I want everybody to have a role and get involved." I mean, Clement 4 for 100, Aguilar 9 for 84, Jeffrey 3 for 73, Ertz 7 for 67. Torrey Smith had a catch. He had the catch off his helmet last night.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's been the story of this offense all year. Been how they spread the football around, and that makes it very, very difficult. You know, I compared it. People always talk about when the Detroit Lions had Calvin Johnson, who was, you know, so by far the best receiver in this league, and then he sort of retired prematurely, and the panic was, how could you possibly replace a player like that? And the answer is you can't. But somehow the Lions offense got better without him. And it wasn't because he wasn't as good as people said he was. He was every bit as good. But they were forced not to rely on him. In other words, every time it was 3rd and 10 in Detroit, you knew where the football was going. Then they were forced to go to different guys, and you become more difficult to defend when everybody from Alshon Jeffrey to Zach Ertz to Nelson Aguilar to all the way down to Corey Clement, an undrafted rookie, can hurt you. But him specifically, from somebody who's been there every day since the beginning of OTAs and training camp, Corey Clement couldn't catch a cold when he got here. He wasn't asked to catch the football at the University of Wisconsin. How hard he has worked and the way he has turned himself into a good receiver out of the backfield is one of the great stories of this season.
Really good stuff. Of course, a long season, John McMullen with the Eagles, as he just said, from day one to the final game of the NFL calendar year, which is Super Bowl 52. The Eagles are Super Bowl champions. And now the hard part. We know the decision on Foles, but what other things does Howie Roseman have ahead of him now with this roster? Because there are a couple of one-year deals or a couple of key guys that, had some contributions that he's going to have to make decisions on.
Yeah, it starts with all those one-year guys who performed at such a high level. Patrick Robinson, who I think was the best nickelback in football throughout the entire season. But you have to ask yourself, at his age, with his injury history, do you want to pay him significant money to bring him back? And that's a question because you have young corners. And Sidney Jones is going to be here, and Rasul Douglas, in theory, is going to get better. Maybe Jalen Mills figures down the road inside at that slot position. Chris Long, how many big plays did he make? I think he turned the NFC Championship game around with his hurry. It wasn't a sack. It turned into a Patrick Robinson pick six. But Garrett Blunt was great against his old team, as was Chris Long, winning back-to-back Super Bowls with different teams. All these one-year deals, and it's some guys are going to go, and the two most likely are probably Torrey Smith and LeGarrette, because now you have Jay Ajayi under contract, and he's probably going to take on a bigger role. And it's tough to keep 53 guys together, and it's going to be no different for Howie Roseman.
We'll obviously keep our eyes on all that, but the Eagles are Super Bowl champions with this group of guys, and many of the guys, too. Wentz wants to play again, although he's not under contract. He wants to play again, so we'll see what ends up happening to him. Sidney Jones, another guy who did not play all season long, so it'll be a very interesting offseason for the Super Bowl champions. John, we got plenty more football in the distance, but we'll probably be talking about this one for a couple more days.
I would think so.
All right,
kind of a big deal I hear back there.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad last night. So one gentleman eat horse feces. The Ritz-Carlton had its awning broken, but hey, it's nothing you don't see in other cities when teams win.
I do the Barry Sanders approach. Act like you've been there. Celebrate, but celebrate classy. class of late.
Well, you had riots in Boston last night. They didn't even win.
Yeah, well, they're angry too.
All right, man. We'll talk again tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Mike.